stay tuned to the end of this video for a bonus Lego set review. You've all been expecting this one, haven't you? Well, here you go. I'm not going to waste too much time on this intro. I love Lord of the Rings, you love Lord of the Rings, a lot of people love Lord of the Rings. This video isn't really going to say things you haven't already heard, but I did want to make it in order to talk about some of the parts of the story that stick out to me the most. It is going to involve me praising things that a lot of fans didn't like and criticizing things they did, but I think you just might live. Now sit down and listen to me yap. I have a rather complicated relationship with fantasy stories, and one does not simply discuss any kind of high fantasy without bringing up Tolkien in some way, because his works have largely become the backbone of the entire genre. That's not inherently a bad thing. Every writer pulls inspiration from something, either their own personal lives or works they enjoy. The trouble is that the stories that stick with you the most are the ones you consumed as a child, formative years and all that jazz, and because children perceive the world quite differently from adults, they can miss certain things that adults would notice. So when the stories you most remember are the ones you experienced as a child, you tend to keep your childhood interpretations of that story, which means that a lot of things will go unnoticed. Not to mention the way that other aspects of your upbringing will affect you, such as growing up as a specific race, gender, religion, social class, etc. So a middle-aged man who watched these movies as a child is going to have a very different perspective than me, a Gen Zer who was born after these movies came out, watched them at 18, and grew up with the internet and likely in a very different environment. I find myself having very different opinions from the vast majority of the fandom. Actually, no, that's not fair. I have very different opinions from some very loud people in the fandom. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend like some of y'all aren't annoying and misogynistic. Stop doing it and I'll leave you alone. We all like these movies, but our reasons for doing so is very different. It's like how I and someone else might both like American Psycho, but I like it because it's a deconstruction of the problems with capitalism and toxic masculinity, while they might like it because they think Patrick Bateman is cool, which is just objectively false on every conceivable level. Likewise, I primarily like Lord of the Rings because I think the characters have very compelling dynamics amongst everything about having to save the world, but someone else might like it because it's a story about having to save the world. Many people are more interested in a grand-scale universe with extensive lore, which Lord of the Rings admittedly is, but I find myself being on the exact opposite end of that spectrum for one very specific reason. The fact that stories with grand stakes usually end well, while stories with small stakes don't always. You see this a lot in procedural dramas, and it's something that a lot of writers struggle to understand. A plotline about the entire city of Austin potentially blowing up doesn't really carry any weight because you know it's not going to end badly. We still have 14 episodes left in the season, and the audience would literally riot if you pulled something like that. But the individual rescues always carry a decent risk that someone won't make it out. Ironically enough, it tends to be the stories with lower stakes that tend to have more of an impact on the characters, because you're not always sure of how things will turn out. In Lord of the Rings, it isn't the question of whether or not Sauron is going to be defeated. This is a book for children. The chance of the villain not being defeated is pretty small. It's the questions of, are Frodo and Sam going to stick together all the way to Mount Doom? Is Aragorn going to find the motivation to become king? Is Faramir going to deal with his incessant daddy issues? Stay tuned to find out. Sure, Tolkien has crafted a rather extensive universe with thousands of years of lore and backstory on basically every character, but most of that isn't actually present in the story itself because Tolkien was good at understanding when things were relevant to the plot and when they could just stay in the nerd Bible. And so he put that in the appendixes in other books, which means that the people who don't care about it don't have to read it. A lot of other writers, especially in fantasy, are not very good at that. They tend to focus too much on the stakes being as epic as possible, and as a result, their characters tend to fall by the wayside. Add to that the fact that people often let their own biases and privileges get in the way of their work, and what you end up with is fantasy having developed a reputation for largely consisting of condonement of the status quo, but with dragons, so that makes it okay. People like Lord of the Rings as a child. They grew up, they made their own Lord of the Rings, and completely missed what made it so good. It happens all the time with all kinds of art. All that really means for me is that when I hear about a work, I look up a synopsis in advance and determine whether or not I'm interested. If I am, I engage with the work and approach it critically and drop it if it starts to go off the rails. It does mean that my consumption of fantasy is somewhat limited, but I'm more than okay with that. At least I have Lord of the Rings to come back to if I need good fantasy to consume. And just so we're clear, as I said in the last video, please don't make any recommendations. I'm going to explore the genre at my own pace. Now that's not to say that Tolkien never lets his own personal beliefs about the world seep into his writing in a way that negatively impacts the story. He does, and we'll talk about that in just a little, but it's not to the point where it overwhelms everything and still makes for a very good story. This isn't a J.K. Rowling situation where the only way to make the story worth engaging with is through a major overhaul. The core of Tolkien's work, although flawed, is solid. A good writer can easily build off the franchise to potentially make it even more progressive while still maintaining the fundamental aspects of Tolkien's ideas. And what better way to start than by adapting Lord of the Rings to film? The wonderfully talented trio of Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens, here on out referred to as PFP for simplicity's sake, crafted a 3-movie screenplay that did an excellent job of making me become completely obsessed with the Tolkienverse, and constantly take damage points from dealing with the emotional trauma. Have you or a loved one found out that you sob uncontrollably whenever you think about Boromir? You may be entitled to financial compensation. Start shelling out that $3 billion, gang. But my plans for a class action lawsuit against New Line Cinema aside, I'm only kidding, guys. Don't call your lawyer. I'm sure they're busy sending VeggieTales another cease and desist. Let's actually start doing some character analysis, shall we? Let it be known that I've only seen the extended editions of the later 2 movies, so if there's something in the extended edition of Fellowship of the Ring that changes my point significantly, I'm likely not going to have seen it since I've only seen a few of the added scenes. But I think I did a good enough job pleading my case with what limited information I had. And we're specifically talking about the movies, except for some parts of the book where they're relevant. So if I see any of y'all say it's different in the books where I didn't bring it up, you will not be safe from my wrath. We are not debating here, and you need to learn to start paying attention. Right then, onward we go, starting off with... Why Tolkien discourse is as annoying as it is due to the fan base's perceptions of the rings themselves. And when I say rings, I also mean the Palantirs and Gold Sickness and any other tools of Sauron. For our purposes, they all pretty much work the same way. The fandom generally believes that wearing a ring slowly corrupts you over time due to being tempted by their powers. And while that is true, it doesn't really dive into what exactly that temptation is and how it affects each character differently. Allow me to pose a question to you. Why did Smeagol and Isildur get corrupted by the ring really quickly, while Bilbo and Frodo took a lot longer to feel the effects? No, really, I want you to stop and think about that for a minute, because that is something that is incredibly important to understand whenever we're discussing these movies. Here's what I came up with. The reason it took Smeagol and Isildur less time to get affected by the ring is because what pulled them in is fundamentally different from what pulled in Bilbo and Frodo. Whenever you wear the One Ring, Sauron can see you and know what you're thinking. He knows exactly who you are, and as such, he knows exactly how to get to you. Power appeals to just about everyone, but it appeals to them in very different ways. Some people want power so they can hurt and kill all of the people that they hate. Some people want power so they can stop that from happening, or take revenge on the people who hurt them. There's a very big difference between those two motivations, and one of those people is absolutely worse than the other. But to Sauron, it's all the same. These people are all potential tools to him. Now, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily a bad person for being swayed by Sauron. On the contrary, it's oftentimes the best people that are easiest for him to manipulate. He'll see that thing about you that makes you desire power and offer you the ability to have that if you take the ring. But because that desire is different for everyone and stronger in some people take much less time to be affected. Take Isildur, for instance. Not much is known about him in the movies, but based on the fact that he was the one to cut the ring off of Sauron's finger, he definitely knew it was powerful and quickly became enamored with it. And I think he was drawn to the power of the ring because he liked being the one to have defeated Sauron and getting all the glory for it. Largely speculative on my part, but that's what I gathered from what little they gave me. Gollum is also a character who picked up the ring and got affected by it very quickly, except instead of refusing to destroy it, he murders his cousin. Again, not much about Gollum's past is known in the movies, but I dare you to argue that someone who commits murder over a piece of jewelry 2 minutes after picking it up was mentally stable. Sauron got to these two a lot sooner than many other people who took the ring, and there's a good reason for that. It's that classic phrase, power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. Gollum and Isildur were given power, or at least a proxy to it, and it showed who they really were. Selfish at best and cruel at worst, and willing to put others' safety at risk to get what they wanted. Bilbo and Frodo, on the other hand, are very different. I've got a script in the works about the Hobbit movies and why I think they're great, so we'll get more into Bilbo's journey there, but suffice it to say that he clearly had a lot of pressure on him to help out the company, and later save Thorin from the gold sickness. And losing Thorin clearly had a profoundly negative impact on Bilbo, as he probably felt like he failed him. All of that is a lot for one guy to deal with. So it's no wonder that once he got home, he basically self-isolated and tried not to let people in emotionally like he's Hamish Abernathy or something. This only gave the ring more power over him, and probably made it easier to convince him that because it was what helped him out of several sticky situations, that was the only thing he ever needed. A lot of people try to deal with mental health issues by self-isolating and cutting off their loved ones, and pro tip for life, that is one of the worst things you can do to yourself. People need love and support in their lives, and without it, you're only going to make your problems worse. Abusers do this as well a lot of the time, as I've talked about in the past. Cutting off a victim's support system helps to keep them under the abuser's control. This is what Gollum does to Frodo, by trying to blame Sam for all their problems, so Frodo will ditch him and go exactly where Gollum wants him to go. Frodo, like Bilbo, is already dealing with a lot of pressure on his mission, except instead of just having the fate of some dwarves in his hands, he has the fate of literally the entire world. Add to that the fact that Frodo probably blames himself for Gandalf dying, as he was the one who decided that the Fellowship should go to Moria, and possibly even Boromir dying as well. And you could even add in Frodo having the burden of being related to Bilbo, one of the only hobbits who ever went out and did anything interesting, so he now feels like he has a legacy to live up to. Sure, that's pretty much entirely self-imposed, but stress is stress no matter who's putting it on you. All of this means that Frodo is in a very fragile emotional state, and that makes it very easy for both Gollum and the Ring to manipulate him. The Ring by promising power, and Gollum by promising to help Frodo out while also attempting to take back the Ring. He's using the fact that he's leading them to Mount Doom to justify Sam being wrong for not trusting him, and he does this to drive Sam and Frodo apart so that he can lead Frodo exactly where he wants to go. Gollum is abusing Frodo, and I don't use that term lightly. I know these patterns very well, so I picked up on this pretty quickly, and that's why I tend to have far more sympathy for Frodo than a lot of other fans. None of this makes Frodo a bad person, just someone who's under a lot of stress and depressed at losing the people he cares about. But some people don't like him because he has the audacity to lose it at Sam a few times when he's on the verge of a mental breakdown. I know it's not great, but it's completely understandable considering the circumstances, especially when you notice that Frodo regrets what he does immediately after it happens.
What do you know about it? Nothing. I'm sorry, Sam. I don't know why I said that.
This isn't a novel concept. People lash out when they're stressed and angry, and this situation is 1,000 times more stressful than most things the average person experiences. Gollum's crimes are far worse than Frodo's by a long shot, but there are still plenty of people who have far more sympathy for him than they do for Frodo. This is a problem that happens a lot in the fandom and many others, but just put a pin in that for now and let's move on. This all hits a breaking point when Gollum blames Sam for losing the Lembas bread and Frodo tells him to leave. Sam does, until he finds out that Gollum was the one responsible and goes back to save Frodo. Good thing he did, because Frodo had been captured by Shelob, and Sam was able to save him and then carry him up the slopes of Mount Doom. Sam is such an interesting contrast to Frodo, because he doesn't have the same burdens that Frodo does. He doesn't have the family history of doing something extraordinary, and he wasn't even supposed to come on the quest. He chose to come of his own volition. Without all that pressure, self-imposed or otherwise, Sam just has his love and devotion to Frodo, and that's why he comes with him, why he tries to keep him safe from Gollum, why he doesn't leave until his absolute breaking point, why he faces down Shelob, who is apparently the spawn of a primordial demon. Sam is utterly devoted to his friend, and there is nothing in the world that can keep him away from Frodo for very long.
I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. A promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee. And I don't mean to. This
is why Sam is one of the most beloved characters in Lord of the Rings, and why he's one of my 3 favorites. Yes, it is in fact a 3-way tie. The pure selfless love and devotion he has for Frodo is something I think we should all aspire to. And selfless love is one of my favorite character traits. The type of person who showers their loved ones in affection, who will give up the things they want to help them, who will literally carry them through hell. I adore that. And ultimately, it's Sam's devotion to Frodo that allows them to get to Mount Doom and destroy the ring. It reflects a larger theme in Tolkien's books and how love and friendship is the single most important thing in the world. People are constantly showing affection for each other through kind words, physical touch, saving each other's lives, the best love language out there. And on the contrary, one of the antagonists is a character whose entire story revolves around affection for his children being conditional on them benefiting him in some manner. You're going to hear me talk a lot about this, so be prepared for some incessant gushing, because I live for this type of characterization. And I feel very seen by it too, because it's how I write most of my characters. If the heroes love someone, they'll show it, and the villains either lack affection or make it conditional. Heroes good, villains bad, I'm a simple lady and I'm not ashamed to admit it. It's not that I don't appreciate characters with more tense or complex relationships, but most of the time those relationships reach the point of it simply being a question of whether you can repair things or whether it's best to walk away. Sam and Frodo do have a little bit of that as well, what with Gollum driving them apart, but they ultimately come back together, which makes me very happy. Whether or not you can fix a relationship has to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. And if that's a situation you're going through IRL, it's a conclusion that you ultimately need to be the one to make yourself. But I enjoy it much more when people are able to reconcile. So I find that whenever I write that kind of relationship, I tend to make it work out in the end. Quick, guess which characters in The Hobbit Nikki became emotionally attached to? Quick, guess which characters from Ace Attorney Nikki was already emotionally attached to? Oh, so you definitely ship Sam and Frodo, do you? Okay, look, I have nothing against it. The two of them are really cute together. I just don't particularly ship it myself. Look, I need to clarify that I have absolutely no problem with the gays. And in a fandom where I constantly have to witness people being homophobic, sometimes I like to indulge in the everyone is gay trope just for the sake of spiting them. I don't really know what it is about Sam and Frodo that makes me not ship them as much as anything else. It's not Sam being married to Rosie, that's never been an issue for me. Polyamory is always a thing, and I found myself indulging in it a lot more recently. I just never really saw Sam and Frodo as being a thing, but I do engage with the ship on occasion because it is objectively a great ship. In general, I tend to be flexible about my pairings, because the aforementioned love of expressing affection means that I like cute and fluffy relationships of any variety. Friends, family, romantic partners. I'll take anything as long as it makes me audibly squeal in delight. So I could take Sam and Frodo being best friends or boyfriends, and with the exception of good canon couples or the one or two other ships that I'm really attached to, I could do the same for just about anything. Love in all its forms is what I'm really after, and these two have that in spades, so I adore them in any possible context. Alright, it's time for a quick interlude. I am now going to spend a few minutes gushing about two of my favorite supporting characters.
Bitches slow, can't get on my speed. They stare cause they know I'm the ITGIRL. You know I am that girl.
Oh my god, they're so cool. I love them so much. It goes without saying that I adore Legolas and Gimli. Hardly a novel concept, I know, but I had to bring it up regardless. They might just be the best supporting characters outside of two we'll discuss next section, and what makes them so good is one simple thing: banter.
What's happening out there?
Shall I describe it to you? Or would you like me to find you a box?
These two have some amazing back and forth that I turn into an absolute giggling fool over. Friendly competition is a really fun dynamic, but it's one that can be difficult to get right because it can quickly devolve into people just being unnecessarily mean to each other, or you might end up trying to get a frenemy out of someone who should solidly be in the enemy category. But these two never get that far, which is primarily due to the fact that they've always been on the same side. Sure, their people have a very tense history. Their fathers had direct beef back from the Hobbit era, which is really funny to think about. But with the resurgence of Sauron and the creation of the Fellowship, there isn't space for that anymore. So the two of them only get a brief moment of genuine fighting back at the council before Frodo agrees to take the ring, and then it's all smooth sailing from there. True, Legolas and Gimli are quite different. Coming from completely different races has given them strong variances in combat styles and cultural values, as well as vastly different personalities. Legolas is as chill as an ice cube, more like an ice cube whose response to threats is to spontaneously combust. And Gimli is about as stubborn as a mule with a lit firecracker and a slight drinking problem. That's really why they complement each other so well, because they can both be a little intense, which means they can handle each other's intensity. They match each other's freak, as the kids say. But what really makes Legolas and Gimli shine is the fact that they protect each other at all costs. Sure, the orc-killing contest may be a playful rivalry, but they're still keeping each other and the rest of the world safe. And when Éomer threatens Gimli, Legolas has his bow out in an instant. Nope. Hero or villain, no one threatens his best friend. And then the duo gets even better when you add the rest of the Fellowship into the mix. Legolas and Gimli are fiercely loyal to each other, but they're also fiercely loyal to their friends, Aragorn especially. They go to find Merry and Pippin after they're captured by orcs, they fight at the Battle of Helm's Deep and the Battle of Pelennor Fields, and they follow Aragorn to bring back the Ghost Army. Side note, the Ghost Army is the second most unexpected yet amazingly cool thing from these movies, right under the wizard exorcism. No matter how dangerous things get, Legolas and Gimli are here to help out their friends, and it's all because of that selfless love and loyalty we talked about earlier. I would go with you to the ends of the earth no matter how many times you end up taking me. I love it. It's mwah. Legolas is technically my favorite of the two, but only by a little. That's because he has the benefit of having a particularly strong friendship with Aragorn as well as Gimli. The movies never really get into how these two know each other, but the books reveal that Aragorn was the one who brought Gollum to Legolas' home of Mirkwood, which is probably how they met. And Legolas knew of Aragorn's status as Isildur's heir and was the one who told the council, so he has deep trust and respect for him, and Aragorn trusts and respects him as well. My favorite scene between them is at Helm's Deep, when Legolas hands Aragorn his sword, and apologizes for not trusting him during the whole accidentally telling everyone they're going to die incident. And Aragorn just tells him there's nothing to forgive.
We have trusted you this far, you have not led us astray. Forgive me. I was wrong to despair.
Legolas wasn't trying to question Aragorn's leadership abilities, he was reflexively lashing out because he was scared, which is perfectly understandable considering the situation. And Aragorn knows this, and reminded Legolas that it wasn't his fault, which Legolas is appreciative of. These two are adorable together, and I love them very much. They also have a cute little moment at Aragorn's coronation. Aw, that was nice. Legolas is also just really funny to watch because 90% of the time he has no idea what the hell is going on. Mostly because he had so few lines that Orlando Bloom had to just make faces at the camera in hopes of kind of character came across. Which works because if you consider how elves perceive time, this whole thing was just like a really strange vacation for Legolas. Bro did not know what he was signing up for, but he's trying his best and I love him for that. And by Gandalf's beard, he is so damn pretty. Look at him. Is that not the most beautiful man you've seen in your entire life? Okay, second most beautiful. He does get it from his dad. All the elves in this franchise are gorgeous, by the way. I love that about them. I am the world's biggest Middle-earth elf simp. I think hugging one of them would fix all my problems. Yes, that includes all of you. You're very pretty too. As for Legolas and Gimli as a couple, well, I said there were a few ships I was attached to, and this is one of them. I mean, just look at them. They're so cute. Legolas brought Gimli into elf heaven. I dare you to tell me that isn't at least a little bit gay. Admittedly, neither one of these characters is very deep. They're either being take-no-prisoners badasses or insufferably adorable and don't really do much beyond that. And I don't say that as a point of criticism. Legolas and Gimli are supporting characters, so they're allowed to be only two-dimensional. Legolas does get more depth to his character in the Hobbit movies, and I will discuss that when we talk about them, but that's largely separate from these movies, so it isn't really a factor here. Getting back to the actual meat of the subject, you might remember I mentioned that Sam was in a three-way tie for my favorite character. Who are the other two? That just so happens to be... I'll admit to not thinking much of Boromir at first. He was just the other member of the Fellowship that was there for reasons. I think this is one of the downsides to not having seen the extended edition of the first movie, because looking at a few of the scenes I added in, Boromir is in a fair few of them and seems to have more depth added to his character that way. But for the sake of this video, let's focus on the theatrical release. For the vast majority of the movie, Boromir is mostly just being crew member number 9, but he does have his moments. Like, there's this really cute scene of him training with Merry and Pippin, which always helps to warm the rapidly growing ice around my heart. Then immediately after, Boromir picks up the ring and Aragorn has to remind him to give it back to Frodo. He actually tries to take it again right at the end of the movie. Not exactly a novel concept, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who wouldn't be tempted by the ring, but as we discussed earlier, the ring always knows exactly how to get to you. How does it do that to Boromir? We'll get to that! The big moment when it comes to Boromir is at the end when he dies. And yeah, this moment did get to me. Especially because Boromir dies trying to save Merry and Pippin from orcs, and when they get captured and Aragorn goes to talk to Boromir in his final moments, what's the first thing he says?
They took the little ones.
Yeah, no concern about himself, just his little hobbits is. And the way he calls them the little ones, like he sees them as little brothers. Oh, that's so sad. The first time I watched this movie, Gandalf's death was technically sadder to me, but this also hurt a lot, too. Boromir is clearly regretting what he did to Frodo, and realizing that he never would have been able to resist the ring. And in his final moments, he's able to accept Aragorn as the future king of Gondor, after refusing to do so back at the council. Turns out this is because his father Denethor is the steward of Gondor, basically the stand-in king until Aragorn comes back to claim his throne, but I believe that's only talked about in the extended edition. Oh, so Boromir's just like if Aragorn being king is due to family loyalty. Well, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. The Two Towers is when Boromir really starts to become such a fascinating character, which changed things for me when we meet Faramir, who informs Frodo and Sam about Boromir's death, which he knew because he found his broken horn and then saw him in a vision. And it turns out...
He was my brother.
Oh, this is gonna hurt. Although I guess that explains why Boromir became so attached to Merry and Pippin. It's those big brother instincts for you. Then we get a flashback to a few months prior when Boromir gets sent off to the Council of Elrond. This is a scene that is only available in the extended edition, and I really think it shouldn't have been, because this ends up being very important to understand both of the brothers' characters. It turns out that their father Denethor is an absolute garbage man, who openly favors his older son and insults Faramir for not being good enough in his eyes. This is what we call a golden child scapegoat dynamic, where an abusive parent treats one child with praise and admiration, and the other with scorn and derision. Zuko and Azula are probably coming to mind here, seeing as they're one of the most well-known examples. The entire goal of parents like Ozai and Denethor is to drive the siblings apart by causing them to compete for affection, and they often cause the golden child to join in bullying the scapegoat. This means the children will be so focused on fighting with each other that they won't see that the parent is the real problem. It doesn't take a psychologist to know that this often leads to people having a lot of mental health problems. But what's interesting about these two in particular is how they seem to defy the typical conventions of this dynamic. You'll note that Boromir, the golden child, seems to be the one who defies their father the most. Faramir, the scapegoat, is the one who is still mostly under his control. And that's odd because typically it's the other way around. The scapegoat usually escapes the abuse sooner, and the golden child later, if at all. Also, the golden child often takes part in the abuse of the scapegoat, but Boromir is the exact opposite. He actively stands up for Faramir and tries to tell their father to give him more credit.
Always you cast a poor reflection on me.
That is not my intent.
You give him no credit, and yet he tries to do your will.
I love this, by the way. If you see my video on Edwin Drood, you'll know that I adore protective older siblings. Sibling dynamics are my second favorite type of relationship to explore, just under parent-child relationships. And due to my previously mentioned love of wholesome and affectionate relationships, of course older siblings who stick up for the younger siblings is something that I adore beyond all measure. This is part of why these two are my other favorite characters, because they love each other so much and express that love no matter what their father thinks about them, and because, as I'll elaborate on, their stories end up going in a very interesting direction. So why do Boromir and Faramir break the convention of the typical golden child scapegoat dynamics? Well, the thing about abuse is that it affects everyone differently. That's why we have multiple trauma responses to categorize the different ways in which people learn to survive their abuse. The exact way in which a person was abused, their age, previous life experiences, their relationships with other people, these all factor into how a person learns how to cope. So while there are recognizable patterns among survivors, not everyone responds the same way to the same thing. Moreover, every abuser is different and uses different types of abuse. Sometimes in narcissistic parents, the golden child's mistakes are shrugged off and the scapegoats are hyper-focused on. But sometimes the scapegoat's mistakes are the ones ignored because they're expected to fail, and the golden child has their problems taken far more seriously. This means that both of these men are under intense pressure to succeed, but for different reasons. Boromir has been made into the example of what Faramir should be doing, so he's forced to always be the best and do everything Denethor says. On the other hand, Faramir is so used to never getting any praise that he's doing anything he can to get it, no matter how desperate or irrational. It gives Denethor a very strong grip over both of them. But time has allowed Boromir to grow wise to all of this, so he knows that he's being abused. He understands that Faramir is also under the intense pressure to succeed, even if for a different reason. And it's probably because he's gotten plenty of praise that he knows Denethor is capable of being encouraging when he wants to be, and just isn't doing that to Faramir. That's also why he appears to be a lot more self-assured, even if only to an extent, because he's had someone actually tell him that he's doing good. As long as everything is going well, Boromir and Denethor have an outwardly positive relationship. But I have a hunch that Denethor starts treating him badly when he doesn't meet expectations, and what made me come to this conclusion is Boromir's desire for the ring. Remember how I said that Sauron knows exactly how to coerce people? He knows that Denethor wants the ring, and that Boromir has the best chance of being the one to deliver it to him. Because Boromir is the golden child and has the expectation put onto him that he'll be the one to always succeed, he wants to be able to take the ring and give it to his father, where he believes that it can be used to save Gondor. This is also probably why he doesn't want Aragorn taking over as king, because it's Boromir's job to save Gondor, not this other guy's. And Denethor doesn't seem like the type to let go of power very easily. Sauron knows this, and he deliberately uses it to try and get Boromir to take the ring. It drives Boromir to the point where he attacks Frodo trying to get it from him. He's so desperate to succeed because he knows if he doesn't, Denethor is going to be really pissed at him. And Boromir ends up not only failing, but dying in the process. This sends Denethor completely over the edge, because without his golden child, he has no one there to live up to his expectations. And Faramir now has it a lot worse too, because without Boromir there to stand up for him, he's only driven further into their father's web of abuse. He wants Denethor's approval so badly that he decides to bring Sam and Frodo with him to Osgiliath. He plans on going all the way to Minas Tirith, but ends up changing his mind and letting them go. This is an important moment because it shows that Faramir is still a good man and is willing to do the right thing. It's the first time he really defies Denethor in any way, and Denethor's hold on him is starting to loosen. Then in Return of the King, Faramir is actively arguing with him, but that only lasts for so long because now he's in Denethor's presence. I talked before about how if you're dealing with unrequited love, the best way to move on from those feelings is to get some time away from that person. Same goes for abuse. It's hard to believe you're loved and valuable when you're always around a person who's telling you otherwise. So while Faramir does make some progress, it isn't much. Notice that the two of them are arguing about Boromir, which leads to Denethor having a moment where he hallucinates Boromir and grows angry at Faramir when the vision disappears. That's the moment when Faramir is sucked right back into that web of abuse and doesn't start to leave again until his father's death. All of this comes to a head when Denethor orders Faramir to lead a charge to reclaim Osgiliath. This is a suicide mission, and anyone with two brain cells to rub together knows that. But Denethor is so insistent that it will work that he demands it anyway. So Faramir concedes, and as expected, everyone dies except for him. Some people might argue that Faramir is a bad person for going along with this, but that ignores the fact that A, this is not his decision, he doesn't really get a choice here, and B, it's perfectly understandable to see why Faramir would do this considering everything he's been through. The constant never-ending abuse, the loss of his brother, the armies of Mordor kicking down the doors with no one being prepared thanks to his royal bitchiness, having to suffer Gollum's mere presence, and of course, this moment.
You wish now that our places had been exchanged. That I had died and Boromir had lived.
Yes. I wish that.
Oh, that's a thing to say. That is certainly a thing you could say. Yeah, this right here, this is the biggest gut punch in the entire trilogy. Maybe in any movie ever. I've seen plenty of villains say and do things that are technically worse than Denethor's actions, but this just hurts. It's this moment in particular that really showcases how great of an actor David Wenham is. I don't think he gets enough appreciation among Tolkien fans compared to the rest of the cast. He absolutely nails that wounded puppy dog expression, and you can hear in his voice that he's barely holding back tears but still manages to keep himself together. That is painful. And when you really stop and think about it, what reason does Faramir have to live anymore? His mom's long dead, his brother's dead, his dad hates him, and they're all completely screwed. This is why back in the Two Towers, Faramir releases Sam and Frodo, full well knowing the consequences. It's not just about him choosing to do the right thing, it shows how he's begun to lose the will to live. When you think about it this way, the decision to go and reclaim Osgiliath starts to make sense. If Faramir succeeds, his father might have some respect for him, and if he fails, well, he gets to be with his loved ones again. If you're all gonna die anyways, and let's be clear, they would have had Rohan not intervened, why not die with a little bit of Dad's approval? The thing is, it's so easy to say what you would do in someone else's situation when you've never been in that situation, or have already come out the other side. But having gone through my fair share of mental health struggles, not due to abusive parents, it was a lot of things I'm not going to get into here, I know what it's like to feel completely hopeless. Don't worry, it's never gotten that far, and I'm doing a lot better nowadays. A very good therapist has helped a lot in that regard. But I empathize with Faramir very deeply, which is why I give him a lot more grace than certain other people. And PFP definitely understood and were more than willing to extend him that grace as well. That scene of the soldiers charging towards Osgiliath is framed with Denethor being the one with blood on his hands, and as with the book, it's ultimately him that dies instead of Faramir. Mostly because he wouldn't just listen to Pippin when he was trying to tell him that Faramir was still alive, the incompetent buffoon. I honestly think that Denethor is my favorite antagonist in the movies, even more than Sauron. Most of the bad guys are just evil dictator and his evil army, which is all well and good. Evil dictators are the perfect foundation for a villain. Trust me, I'm currently living under a man who's getting pretty damn close to being one. But at least when you know that person is evil, it's a lot easier to be aware that something needs to be done. Abusers are very different. You can't always see just how bad things are when you're the only one being affected. Think about it for a minute. Picture someone being able to so thoroughly worm their way into your mind that they can completely control how you perceive yourself, how they'll switch back and forth between loving and despising you, just enough to give you hope that things can be different, and then it never is. How they'll push you into lashing out and doing things you never expect of yourself, and then blame you for daring to be upset when you're mistreated, to the point where you start to think that you're a terrible person who doesn't deserve anything good. No one will ever love you, except me. I love you. I'm so good to you even though you don't deserve it. Don't think. Don't try to leave. Stay right here with me. You'll never find anything better. Ugh, it's horrifying. I've never even been abused and I get shivers just thinking about it. But it's why Denethor is so good. Stories about survivors getting out of their abuse and being able to live a happy life are some of my absolute favorite. And I'm really glad that this subject was handled with grace. That doesn't happen nearly as often as it should. Now, this is where the average fan would tell me, but Nikki, Denethor is a lot different in the books. I'm well aware of that. In the books, Denethor is a much more competent leader who is using a Palantir, which is how he was open to Sauron's influence while he was grieving the deaths of both his wife and Boromir. A lot of people were not particularly happy with this change, but I think it was a good one and honestly makes the story better. Number one, we've already had plenty of villains who were influenced by Sauron, so having Denethor be a total prick outside of that allows for more variety, which is something that we need more of in stories with multiple antagonists. Number two, the books don't really have that much of an effect here. It doesn't really matter what Denethor did there, because in the movies, he's still a garbage human being. You can't honestly argue that not being as bad somewhere else means you're suddenly not bad here. I know you all want to talk about ruining characters that weren't actually ruined, but maybe don't do that when it comes to the movies you consider to be the second coming of Jesus. Number Number 3, we're not coming back to the fact that Sauron can only appeal to what is already in you. If you really think the books are that important, then it's canon there that Denethor still favored Boromir and didn't listen to Gandalf on a lot of things. Yes, he does still say in the books that he wishes Faramir was dead instead of Boromir. Favoring one child over the other is still wrong regardless of your intentions, and refusing to see that you're wrong makes you a bad person. To me, that sort of thing doesn't say competent ruler, it says egomaniac who needs a few good thwacks across the nose. Here's a thought for you. If someone cannot be trusted to raise 2 children properly, what the hell makes you think they can be trusted to run a country? That's right, they can't. If Denethor was affected by the Palantir, that's because Sauron knew that he was unstable and just needed a nudge in the right direction to go completely off the rails. This is little more than a bad excuse to try and justify Denethor's actions, which you just can't do. There is no justification for this. There's an explanation, but if you're not willing to put in the effort to actually treat people better, your explanation is irrelevant. Because even people who get swallowed in grief and become a more negative version of themselves don't always take it this far. Say what you will about Thranduil, I certainly have thoughts on him, but he never treated his son this badly. And he was also trying to avoid conflict until he was certain things were somewhat safe, and he stopped being an idiot at the end, so he's already a better person than Denethor ever was. Time to pull out that pin from earlier. You're probably starting to notice a pattern here, and how there tends to be a lot more scrutiny given to victims of abuse over their abusers. Denethor abuses his children and allows his city to get overrun by orcs and a lot of his soldiers killed due to his own pride and ego. The fandom tries to justify his actions by saying it was just him being controlled by Sauron and giving in to despair. Faramir brings Frodo and Sam to Osgiliath but ultimately lets them go. The fandom tries to claim his character was ruined by making him not be a nice, perfect hero. Gollum has the ring for about 2 minutes before committing homicide, drives Frodo and Sam apart, and almost gets Frodo killed by Shelob. The fandom claims he's a complex and tragic character who just needed someone to be nice to him. Frodo snaps at Sam a few times after having the fate of the world and the guilt of people's deaths on his shoulders. The fandom claims he's whiny and annoying and basically useless. The double standard is pretty damn obvious. And what's fascinating to me is that if you consider how the rings work, this makes absolutely no sense. If everyone is prone to being tempted by the ring and basically gets possessed the moment they put one on, why are we being more critical of certain people who are affected at the ring's power? Why would we be mad at Frodo, Boromir, and Faramir for being swayed by the same power that swayed Gollum and Denethor? Well, this isn't a problem that's exclusive to the Tolkienverse. Pick just about any piece of media on the planet where abuse is involved, and you can find people who talk about abuse this way. I've discussed this issue on a few separate occasions before, and it happens for a lot of reasons. Sometimes there's racism and/or misogyny involved when the abuser is a white man, the victim is a woman or a person of color. Sometimes it's a romanticizing of abuse when the abuser is conventionally attractive and people try to justify their attraction to them. But what about in a scenario like this, where everyone involved is a white guy and the victims are far more conventionally attractive than their abusers? Because all the things I mentioned are just natural extensions of the primary issue. Abuse victims are expected to behave a certain way before people will take them seriously. Our society expects abuse victims to be shrinking violets, who always try to smooth things over and never fight back. Of the 4 trauma responses, fight, flight, fawn, and freeze, fight tends to be the one that makes people most likely to discredit a survivor. People who respond to abuse by lashing out will often be made out to be the real problem, both by their abusers and the people around them. This is called reactive abuse, and it's far more common than you might realize. It's actually quite rare to see characters who are survivors of trauma and abuse reacting by fighting back and not being villainized for it. Racking my brain outside of the Tolkienverse, I could only think of 3 examples, and 2 of them still develop problems in the latter half of their stories, one being nudged into villain territory for a while, and one losing that fight response and starting to become another shrinking violet. This is a symptom of a larger problem with our culture. People being expected not to fight back against mistreatment is an idea that the systems of power have been spreading for a long time. We have actually had people try to make the argument that trying to escape slavery is a mental illness. It's all designed to make you see resistance as a form of evil. Well, maybe you had a point, but you didn't need to be so extreme about it, you know? Look, you can't deny this belief that no one is truly bad as something that benefits the people currently in power, because when you spend all your time trying to reach across the aisle, you'll inevitably end up leaving people on your side with their own needs unfulfilled. And that's exactly what people who want to hurt you thrive on. They want you sitting around wasting your time trying to de-radicalize them so you can't focus on what really matters. Spreading awareness, providing resources to people in need, actively taking steps to oust the people causing these problems in the first place. It's not inherently wrong to want to help people better themselves, but there comes a point where it just isn't helping anymore. You can give someone all the resources they need to change, but ultimately the decision to change comes down to them. Frodo tried to be nice to Gollum, and where did that land him? In a spider's nest. You can't help someone by hurting yourself. Trust me. It doesn't work.
That isn't the problem, Carl! Why would you think any of this was a good idea?
Probably because I'm a dangerous sociopath with a long history of violence.
Oh, I don't understand how you keep forgetting that.
This is the biggest problem in trying to talk about characters like Faramir, because so many people can't grasp the concept that sometimes you just have to knock a bitch down. They've gotten far too comfortable in doing nothing productive and still expecting tangible results, so actually doing something productive looks like crossing a line. Hell, Frodo and Faramir didn't even push back against their abusers that hard, and they still get treated like garbage for it, just because they're not perfect and nice all the time. Spoiler alert, no one is perfect, and being in that kind of situation will screw with your head. It's completely unreasonable to expect people to act 100% rationally when they've had irrational thoughts ingrained in their minds. I'm gonna be blunt to the people who need to hear this. You have no right to police a survivor's emotions and reactions. Stop acting like Faramir is a bad character for making a few poor decisions. Stop acting like Frodo is useless when he's just trying his damnedest to get to Mordor and not go completely insane. And if you're going to try and absolve Gollum and Denethor of all wrongdoing because the ring made them do it, then at least have the same standard for people who do things that aren't as bad as them. I know that Tolkien was intending for these two to be sympathetic, but he didn't really do a great job with that. Arguing intent never works, because if you set out to give one idea and end up giving another idea, you failed in your job as a writer. And I'm not saying any of this to claim Tolkien is a bad writer. Most of his work is really good. He just didn't do this one thing particularly well, that's all. I still like these two as villains, but that's mostly because the movies are a far more honest portrayal of who they truly are. Like I said, people who adapt Tolkien's works have the opportunity to possibly improve on where he came up short, and PFP did a really good job in that regard. And even Tolkien knew that Gollum and Denethor had to die as they did in the book. I'll give the man credit for the fact that he kills off basically all of his villains, even if he does sympathize with them. His sympathy for them only goes so far, which I can respect even if I don't agree with. That's largely why I feel this debate around the changes from book to movie have little to no place in the argument, because it still ends the same either way. It's a poor excuse to not have to think about the characters and the merits of changing them, rather than solely condemning them on the basis of it being too different. Personally, I'm content to treat the books and movies as being separate from each other when it comes to character analysis. So that's why I only focus on analyzing the movies here. Strip away all your complaints about plot changes, and what you're left with is a story about an abuse survivor who gets to see there's a life beyond a bad situation and resolves to finally try for his happy ending. And that's a good story. I'll concede that it's not perfect. I do wish there had been a scene where Faramir was able to properly confront his father about his abuse, and that he didn't have to survive another traumatic event in order to realize his own worth. But it's still good, and as someone who knows the feeling of being deeply unhappy with your life, albeit for very different reasons, those kinds of stories resonate with me very deeply. That's why Faramir became one of my favorite characters, and why seeing him happy with anyone makes me happy. Good for him. He deserves it. I hope he gets aggressively reassured for the rest of his life. So the trilogy is overall a very lovely experience. And then it ends with Frodo leaving Middle-earth for Valinor, and that's when you lose me. This ending is kinda dumb.
In the arms of the angel, fly away from here.
Now, I'm no Tolkien lore expert, so it's entirely possible I'm missing information that changes the context of everything. If anyone has that, feel free to tell me that everything I'm about to say makes no sense. But the thing about Valinor is that it's basically a mix between heaven and a retirement home. Also, maybe purgatory because Tolkien was Catholic and there's a lot of religious allegory here. Whatever, that's besides the point. The point is, when elves go off to Valinor, they don't come back to Middle-earth. So it's kind of like retiring, but you never see your non-elf friends again, so it's also kind of like dying in a way. At least if you're one of the few mortals that happens to go over. Immortality means that elves get tired of life and eventually want to go to Valinor to do what they were doing in Middle-earth, but away from non-elves. They were never meant to be here in the first place. This isn't their true home. Prettiest obvious parallels to Christianity there, which ends up bringing up... Okay, I know this might not be the place for this discussion, but the worm can has been opened and you're gonna have to deal with it. The debate around whether a life of entirely pleasure and no pain is good for you is one I find myself being very opinionated on. I find it weird when the Christian idea of heaven is posed as being endless joy and light. Does that mean you can't miss your loved ones who aren't there yet or won't end up there because you can't feel pain? Do you lose all knowledge of the troubles of the world, or do you just cease to care because you're in paradise? I feel rather uncomfortable with that. Personally, I don't believe that ignorance is bliss. If other people are hurting and I can do something about it, I want to know so I can help them, even if it causes me pain. If there is an afterlife, I want to go to one where I can relax and chill after years of struggle, but also be aware of what's going on with the living and maybe be able to help them out. I believe that a good life is not life without suffering, but a life that finds meaning beyond suffering and allows you to help cease the suffering of others. But I admit I'm just waxing poetic, so I'll stop that right there. What does all this have to do with Frodo? Well, considering he left because he was stuck dealing with trauma and chronic pain, and Valinor is kind of like heaven, there's no nice way to say this, This comes across as being uncomfortably close to suicide, and since this is the only way Frodo finds peace, yeah, that's not a good thing to say to people who might be struggling with suicidal thoughts, like at all. Sure, it's a tempting offer if you know for certain there's a paradise waiting for you, but people in the real world don't have that luxury. We only have our own personal beliefs and nothing has really been proven yet. So if you're someone who believes in heaven, great. If you're someone who doesn't, not so much. Also, remember how Valinor is not technically the afterlife? That means Frodo is still gonna die for real. And then what? Is there anything after that? I don't know. No one knows. That's the whole point. I don't think I need to explain to you that suicide is a topic that needs to be handled very sensitively, and trying to claim it's a good thing is usually a pretty bad idea. Yes, there are circumstances in which it makes sense, like when someone has a fatal degenerative disease and doesn't want to suffer an inevitable painful death. But trauma and chronic pain are not quite the same as that. To give an example of the subject being handled better, let's talk about one of my favorite video games, Stray Gods. Spoilers for something relatively big in Act 2, so skip to here if you want to avoid that. Stray Gods is a game about Grace, a singer who inherits the powers of the last muse and has to prove herself innocent of murder. The Greek gods are very real in this game, now referred to as idols and with souls called eidolons. When an idol dies, they can pass their souls on to another person, who inherits their powers and eventually regains memories of their previous lives over time. But as more transfers happen, the oldest memories begin to disappear. At one point, the idols were involved in World War II, and Aphrodite was kidnapped and tortured after being betrayed by Ares, so now she has to live with that trauma. In conversations with Eros, it's revealed that she's been through therapy, hypnosis, all kinds of treatments, but nothing helps. So every so often, she passes her soul to someone else, which helps for a while until the memories come back. The goal is that one day, memories of the world will be gone and Aphrodite can live in peace, but that has yet to happen. Come Grace's time as the last muse, Aphrodite is preparing for her ritual once more and planning to pass her soul down to her successor Venus. Very on the nose, I know. And she's asked Grace to use her powers to sing her to sleep and let her pass on in peace. During the song, Grace has the chance to change Aphrodite's mind or let her go through with it. And when I played this game the first time, I made the decisions that felt right, which means letting Aphrodite pass on. So, why did I view that as more positive than what happened with Frodo? Well, for one thing, Aphrodite has very intense trauma that she actively tries to deal with, but never can. Nothing else helps. This is quite literally the only solution to help with the pain, temporary as it is. She's also carrying the trauma of many other previous lives, which certainly doesn't help. If getting to the point where she has destroyed every memory from World War II and earlier is the only way she finds peace, let her have that. It's the least she deserves. Besides, the other idols don't pass on their souls as much, so they can still remember the past and make sure their successors never forget their history. Moreover, when you talk to Venus, she's plenty confident in her decision to take over as a new Aphrodite, and there's always a chance that she could be the one to break the cycle and not pass on her eidolon. It's actually Eros who wants Aphrodite to change her mind, but he'll help Grace regardless of what she decides to do. If you do choose to sing her to sleep, the impact of that decision isn't a light one. You really feel the weight of it. A lot of choices in Stray Gods involve something having to be sacrificed, and there really is no way for everything to be perfect. There are always consequences. And while I love my fix-it-fix and happily ever afters, I do also enjoy stories that make you really feel the impact of making a difficult decision. I can take bittersweet, just not bitter. I can understand a player choosing to go either way with this, but I ultimately think the best decision is to respect Aphrodite's wishes. You can argue that the therapy not working is just a contrivance to make the player feel better about that decision, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but at the very least it's an understandable decision to make. Yeah, that segment was mostly so I could yap about Stray Gods. I'd do a video on that at some point. The big issue with Frodo in comparison is that it's not nearly the same situation. I get it, that kind of trauma is a lot to deal with, but not to be that person, but we've already explained that a lot of Lord of the Rings characters have dealt with trauma. Some of them, like Faramir, have even been suicidal. But the entire point of Faramir's story is that there is a hope of life beyond suffering. Taking that away from Frodo just completely spits in the face of everything you've tried to establish. That hope is always here, and hope can sometimes be enough to keep you going.
It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. What are we holding on to, Sam? That there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.
Trying to establish this as your main central theme and then having your main character essentially commit suicide, it's not good. It's not good at all. The character I talked about from Stray Gods is in a uniquely dark situation compared to everyone else in the game, so the decision is understandable. And that story has more of a theme of there are always consequences and nothing is going to end perfectly, but you make the best of it. Lord of the Rings is very different, and this ending is entirely unfitting for it. Suicide is something that you have to be very careful with, and a lot of writers just do not hit that mark. It's rather unfortunate that this is one of those examples. Of course, that's not a movie problem. It was the way Tolkien ended his book, and there was nothing they could do about it, so I put that on his shoulders instead. So yeah, not a great way to end your story, but it is all of one scene in 3 movies, so it doesn't take away from the fact that the Lord of the Rings trilogy is still great. Just stop watching the movie after Sam and Rosie's wedding and there you go, problem solved. Never let it be said that I'm uncritical of the things I like. Conceding where stories come up short is a healthy attitude to have, and that's the type of environment I want to foster on my channel. I just hope a certain audience doesn't find this video and lose their minds over it, but they probably will. It's okay, we'll just hide them from the channel and move on with our lives. Okay, that's everything in terms of major character analysis. Let's talk about the smaller things that I have thoughts on. Obviously, I can't talk about every character, so these are just the ones I had the most thoughts on. I probably should have mentioned this 2 sections ago, but I love the Pippin-Faramir friendship. They're so cute together. Pippin is one of the few characters outside of Boromir who tells Faramir how great he is, and then he saves his life from the pyre Denethor threw him onto. What an absolute king. Their friendship is so strong that Pippin apparently named his son Faramir. That is adorable! That is the cutest thing in the whole damn world! Pippin is just generally great, and Merry alongside him. They're largely the same character paired together, at least for the first 2 movies, and they're mostly comic relief, which I feel I'm in the minority on, but I don't have an issue with characters mostly just being comic relief. I appreciate characters who can keep things lighthearted in the face of danger. It reflects the larger theme of how hope is necessary for survival. Sometimes when your life is falling apart, you have to laugh so you don't cry. I'm not speaking from personal experience, of course. Of course, there is more to Merry and Pippin than just comedic relief. In the 2 Towers, they help the Ents take back Isengard, and then Return of the King, they each get their own thing to do. Pippin gets an adorable relationship with Faramir and saves everyone's asses by lighting the beacons, while Merry helps Éowyn kill the Witch King. I also appreciate how much they care about Frodo, as just like Sam, they weren't supposed to go on the quest and went along just because they loved their friend so much. And then after they died, they got buried next to Aragorn. Aw, that's sweet. I love these 2 so much. They deserve all the happiness in the world. Oh yeah, speaking of Aragorn, he's the best. I already talked about him back in the section on Gimli and Legolas, particularly how he has a really strong friendship with Legolas. His other high points include saving the hobbits from the Nazgul, showing kindness to Boromir before he dies, telling Éowyn that she should join combat because women can fight too, killing the mouth of Sauron, and just overall keeping everyone from completely losing their minds. He's great. Of course, I'm not in the minority on that. Everyone loves Aragorn. It's just that a lot of people tend to completely miss the point of him trusting women to be good in combat, which is rather unfortunate. Aragorn's role in the story is mostly as a leader figure, which is interesting considering he's rather reluctant to take the throne of Gondor. But he's basically forced into a leadership role when the Fellowship splits up, because there's really no one else to do it, and then he just kind of settles into it. That and Elrond having to tell him that his fiancée is dying and he needs to pull himself together if he wants to save her. I don't think they ever really explore where the self-doubt comes from since it wasn't in the books, but I'm fine with it. No notes. 10 out of 10 man. He's beauty, he's grace, he'll rip apart your face. The women in these movies are also great, which I don't find myself saying about fantasy a lot. Arwen is incredible. She saves Frodo from the Black Riders and is mostly just there as motivation for Aragorn to become king. Nothing wrong with being moral support, but there was apparently plans to have her fighting at Helm's Deep, which was cut for reasons I still don't know, but I have my suspicions about. It's a shame, I really would have loved to see that, but I still love Arwen. I love her with Aragorn so much. Get yourself a woman who will give up immortality for you. Galadriel is not in these movies very much, but she does encourage Frodo and gives the Fellowship gifts that would prove to be very important later on. Most of my appreciation for Galadriel came after I started learning more about her, which then caused me to quickly realize I should have appreciated her character in Lord of the Rings as much as I did her later appearances. That was my mistake. I'm sorry, Galadriel. I love you in every version I see of you, and I hope you find nothing but love and happiness. And Éowyn, my queen, the lovely lady who slayed the Witch King and encouraged Merry to fight. What an absolute legend. Which is why it's really disappointing that she largely gets reduced to her inability to cook and unrequited feelings for Aragorn. Look, Éowyn is a princess. She's never cooked because someone has always done it for her. She's trying to help in one of the only ways she's allowed, and you guys are being mean about it. And knocking on her for falling in love with Aragorn and claiming he's too good for her. Of course she's gonna fall in love with him. It's Aragorn. We just talked about how great he is 2 paragraphs ago. I suppose it wouldn't be the token fandom if we didn't reduce women down to their love lives, would it? Considering how badly some of y'all completely missed the point of this character, it's not surprising that would happen. Whatever, I'm not here to psychoanalyze neckbeards. You don't need to appreciate Éowyn. I'll appreciate her. She's mine now. Her and Faramir. I will squeeze them like the precious little angels that they are. Honestly, all the characters in these movies are great. I just happen to be a lot more attached to some of them. And the story as a whole is very engaging. My big issue with it outside of the ending is that because the latter 2 movies involve 3 separate perspectives, it sometimes feels like you're in completely different movies. So you spend 20 minutes with Sam and Frodo, 20 minutes with Merry and Pippin, 20 minutes with the 3 hunters, and then back to Sam and Frodo, and by that point you've almost forgotten about them entirely. Most movies tend to focus on one main track and only briefly follow side characters or antagonists, so Lord of the Rings is definitely taking a unique approach to storytelling. It does take some getting used to, but once you're used to it, you still have a good time. Not a bad method of story structure, just one that's different. And I think that's all the small stuff I want to talk about. If I could say something potentially controversial for a minute, I don't think we should be constantly calling the Lord of the Rings trilogy the best movies of all time. Saying that about anything is a bold statement, because then usually leads to people being convinced that nothing else in a franchise will ever be good enough. If you're the best thing ever, how could anything else ever measure up? And really, how can we say that this is the best thing ever when we've continued to make more art beyond it? The Lord of the Rings movies have been out for over 20 years, which is fairly long in terms of one person's lifespan, but it's really not all that long in the grand scheme of things. In 100 years, every single person who worked on these movies and watched them when they first came out is going to be dead. We're not elves after all. More books and movies will continue to be made, and these movies will still exist, hopefully. So who's to say what's going to be the best thing at that point in time? And what about before Tolkien published his books? What was the best piece of art back then? Does it still hold up today? You can't qualify an entire history of art and literature based on one movie trilogy. How do you think people 100 years from now will feel about you saying that you can? Sorry to get philosophical on you, again, but this is something that we really need to start having more discussions on, because it tends to have a knock-on effect of making certain people who like Lord of the Rings think they're somehow better than people who don't. But, you're not better than them. Someone cannot like a popular piece of art for perfectly valid reasons. I'm sure Star Wars is great, I just don't have an interest in watching it, that's all. The truth is that most people don't actually care what other media people like. My sister doesn't care for Lord of the Rings at all, and she still 3D printed this fidget ring for me because she's great. Thank you, Rachel, I love you very much. If you take someone not liking your favorite thing that personally, that's not a problem with them, that's a problem with you. It might be time to stop letting people's meaningless opinions bother you so much. The other issue with this is people tend to take it very poorly whenever Lord of the Rings changes something from the books. One might argue that's the entire point of adaptations, but that's a discussion for another time. Themes will allegedly be watered down, characters will be ruined, their words not mine, and yet it's still considered to be the best thing ever. Why the contradiction? Funnily enough, it all goes back to what we talked about earlier, narcissistic parenting tactics. As I already explained, some abusers will take the golden child's mistakes far too seriously because they're supposed to be the example for good behavior. And so when Lord of the Rings trilogy messes up, or more accurately just does something certain fans don't like, they forget about it. Because you're supposed to be the good one. How could you make such a terrible decision? If you ask me, that might just be a sign that your expectations are too high. There is no such thing as perfect after all, and I really wish that people would stop thinking that there is. We're going to get into this more in a future video, but basically every addition to the Middle-earth franchise has had to deal with the consequences of this mentality, and has led to a lot of really good works being completely cast aside for not having been good enough. Also racism and misogyny, that's a reason too. Truth is, my priorities when it comes to media analysis has changed quite a bit since I posted my first video essay a year ago. Good God, has it really been a year? Time does fly after all. I tried to focus on analysis first and fandom issues second, and I know that seemed to contradict what I just got done discussing, but my issue isn't that people have these opinions, it's that they never shut up about it. I can't put The Hobbit into the YouTube search bar without getting half a dozen think pieces about how it's the worst thing ever. I can't open a comment section on an Instagram post joking about two characters being gay without a bunch of homophobes having an absolute meltdown about it. I'm getting really sick of it, and I want us to do better. So if anything I said in this video makes you angry or uncomfortable, do yourself a favor, stop and ask yourself why you feel that way, and if feeling that way is actually helping you at all. When a piece of media makes you angry, why is it doing that? Is it pushing toxic themes? Were people exploited or abused in the process of making it? Those are all perfectly understandable reasons to be upset. But something like, it wasn't what I wanted, or it isn't as good as I thought it could have been, maybe isn't worth that getting worked up over. It's time to start doing a little more reflection. And that means all of us, myself included. And there you go, that's it. There's no real conclusion to be made beyond that. Me like the Shiny Ring movies, they're great. Go watch them if you want to, and remember, don't pick up any jewelry you find lying around, it's probably evil. Hello friends, it's Nikki here. You all know that I love Lord of the Rings and Lego. I bought and done reviews on the Shire, Borrowed, and Rivendell sets. I also have an ever-increasing collection of minifigures from the old Retire sets, which is a journey I've been sharing for you all on TikTok and Instagram. Recently, Lego came out with another new set, the Balrog Book Nook, and of course I had to get it. What, am I not supposed to buy every new Lord of the Rings set that comes out? I might have a bit of a problem. I actually got to pre-order the set due to being part of the LEGO Insiders program. I didn't have enough to say about it to make a whole video on it, so I figure I'd tack it on at the end of this one. The Balrog Book Nook is a really great set that makes a perfect addition to my Lord of the Rings collection. It's fairly small, only 1,200 pieces, consisting of one minifigure of Gandalf the Grey and a brick-built Balrog in a frame of stone and fire. You can either fold it up and slide it in between books, or open it completely and put it on a shelf. I opted to display it with my other sets folded up to save space. LEGO sets have always been great when it comes to the small details, and the Balrog Book Nook doesn't have quite as many as some of the others due to being a lot smaller, but the designers managed to put in as many as they can. There's a piece of Mithra buried in the walls, the narrow bridge that can only be crossed one at a time, and the iconic Gandalf quote, "You shall not pass!" The Balrog has intricately designed wings and wields its signature fiery whip, while Gandalf fights with both his staff and his sword Glamdring. The only big complaint I have is that the Balrog is a little difficult to get into place, but it looks super cool when it does. If you like building Legos as much as you like Lord of the Rings, I would definitely recommend the Balrog bookbook. I'll leave a link in the sources document for you to go check it out. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a fantastic day.